Helton. I'm a faculty member at the Ontario Veterinary College here at the University of Guelph, and I also have the privilege of holding the Dairy Farmers of Ontario Research Chair in Dairy Cattle Health, and I will be the moderator for the session this morning and then tomorrow morning as well. This is in fact the 5th annual showcase event since we founded Dairy at Guelph somewhat informally in 2016, and normally we're very excited to meet with folks face to face. But as with many things, COVID has changed the way we do things in 2020. But I guess if we look at the silver lining, I think one of the opportunities that presents us is perhaps to connect with a broader audience. Some folks that might not have been able to come to Guelph and spend the day with us can connect with us virtually and share part of their day with us. And so let's celebrate that and be thankful for that. Our format over today and tomorrow is a little bit different than what we've traditionally done. Each day we have a panel of speakers. Our speakers have pre-recorded their talks, and those are available. You should have been sent a link after your registration, and I hope that you've had a chance to view those presentations. We're very pleased with the time and the effort that our panelists put into making those available to you. We will, in a few moments, move to the open question and answer session with our respective panelists. And I will remind the audience that what we'd like you to do is, if you have questions for our panelists, please use the chat box. So if you sort of wave your mouse over the screen at the bottom, a number of options will appear, and there is a circle with sort of a sound caption, or it says chat box or chat, and we'd ask you to post your questions there, and then as the moderator I should be able to see them and pass those on to our panelists. Before we get started with our formal Q&A, a couple of things I'd like to do. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Dan Lacroix, who is as always, working behind the scenes for Dairy at Guelph and making things happen for us. And thank you very much, Dan, for that. The second thing, I'm very excited to announce quite a significant change in Dairy at Guelph as we move forward from that somewhat informal group of 60 to 70 faculty that were engaged and are engaged in dairy research that sort of formed Dairy at Guelph as an informal network in 2016. We have recently been recognized as a formal center at the University of Guelph. The University of Guelph Senate, at their October meeting, formally announced the launch of Dairy at Guelph, the Center for Dairy Research and Innovation, and we're very excited about that step. If technology will allow, I'm going to just play a short video that hopefully will just share with you a little bit of our excitement about this relaunch of Dairy at Guelph, if you will. Well, that's interesting. Best laid plans. So the video was there and it has now disappeared. Well, I will see about getting that back, but in the interim, as I do that, and I will move forward now and introduce our two panelists for this morning. We're very pleased to have with us two leaders in the dairy industry, one at the global level and the other at a more local, regional, and maybe even national level. Caroline Emond is the Director General of the International Dairy Federation. And for those of you who may not know, the IDF is really the international organization that speaks for the global dairy industry, and it represents 43 countries that produce the vast majority of milk around the world. I've had the privilege of representing Canada on the IDF Standing Committee on Animal Health and Welfare for about the last 10 years, and it's been through my involvement with IDF that I've come to appreciate a couple of things. One is how fortunate we are in our system here in Canada with our supply management system and our great climate and our wonderful partners in the dairy industry. What a great industry we have here. But second is also just the vast differences and yet commonalities in dairy production around the world. I think it's important as we open up new trade opportunities through some of the agreements that have been signed over the last number of years, that I think while traditionally in Canada we've been very inward facing and in our dairy industry, I think we're starting to look outward and probably appreciate more the opportunities in the global dairy market and dairy industry, and I think it's a really nice opportunity for us. Caroline has provided us with a very nice overview of some of the circumstances, challenges, and opportunities on the global sector in her presentation, and I look forward to hearing more about that global perspective from her this morning. Welcome, Caroline. Mike von Massau is a faculty member in the Department of Food, Agriculture, and Resource Economics here at the University of Guelph in the Ontario Agricultural College, and he is also the OAC Chair in Food Systems Leadership. Mike has a strong focus on food supply chains and consumer behavior. He's frequently sought out by local and national media, and I certainly always look forward to hearing him regularly on CBC morning shows locally, and many of those are carried across the country. He has shared his insights into the food supply chain challenges and opportunities that we've experienced in the last 8 months or so in light of COVID. So thank you for that, Mike, and welcome, and we look forward to further your further comments and responses. We'll start this session this morning, and I'll ask first Caroline and then Mike to make some opening comments, perhaps just a few minutes that may be partially a recap of some of the highlights of their presentation or other comments that they may want to make this morning. And Caroline, we'll start with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. First, thank you for having me today. It's really a great opportunity and a treat to be able to have this dialogue with my colleagues from Canada. So I'm very, very happy to be here this morning for you. And I want to congratulate you as well for your recognition for the dairy at Guelph. I think it's a great achievement, so congratulations for that. I will just take a few minutes maybe to briefly summarize key elements of my presentation and encourage some of the people that haven't looked at it yet, maybe to take a minute to do so, as I go into more details about the work that we do at IDF, and it could actually probably influence the work of some of the people attending the event today. I think the one important start is to recognize that the global dairy sector has been on a growing path and is expected to continue to grow for the years to come. And this is mainly due to population growth, but also to per capita consumption increase as well. We also have a strong dairy story. And that's important because dairy is a key part of sustainable food system and healthy diets. But it's also a significant contributor to the SDGs, particularly to alleviation of poverty, zero hunger, and gender equality. And as we've seen in the latest COVID-19 pandemic, dairy has been recognized as essential for the economy, but also for the nutrition, and as shows in tremendous resilience to adapt. And actually, I think Mike addressed it very well in his presentation, to make sure that we were able to address the demand. And the reality is that we have. There was some disruption, but the sector was very, very resilient and adaptable and agile and innovative and creative to answer to the need of the world population. And dairy as well is important to food security. And you've mentioned, David, earlier, trade. And although the percentage of trade in dairy is 9% of the world milk production, the reality is that this percentage is important for the global dairy sector and is key for food security around the world. I've mentioned in my presentation as well key global drivers for our sector. I've mentioned population growth, climate change, dairy safety and quality, sustainability farming, as well as animal care and productivity. And I'm sure those are topics that are familiar to you. And I know I've seen on your day too, you had a lot of technical conference relating to increasing productivity, the importance of genomic reproductive system and all of that. So I think you've addressed that already. And maybe just one element on sustainability. And it's important because we hear more and more people defining sustainability as environmental impact. And this is not the case. Sustainability is an holistic approach, and it includes as well the socioeconomic aspect, the contribution to nutrition, the contribution to culture of the society. So those elements are also super important when we look at the sustainability aspect of a sector. I'll also mention in the challenge and opportunity, the importance to continue to support research and innovation and to promote the science behind dairy. And I've challenged you as member of the scientific community to get inspired by the work that we do of IDF and the work that is needed at the international level, and see how can that help or inspire you in your work, and how can you contribute? Because at the end of the day, you mentioned it, David, we have different situations around the world, but we do have a lot of commonalities. And that's one of the reasons, the raison d'etre of IDF is really to serve as a forum for exchange of knowledge, but also get inspired, look about the best practices, learn about what's done elsewhere, and try to inspire each other. And it's the same thing for the research and technology aspect of it. And maybe the final aspect, just to encourage everybody and every one of you, because you will see in the months to come, everybody is getting ready for the UN Food System Summit. And in that, there will be a lot of food system dialogue organized by government, organized by all kinds of organizations. And it's important that the dairy sector be at the table, that science is put front and center. Because the reality is that sometimes science actually comes second in a lot of discussion, and it is our role to bring it back to the forefront of the. So I'm going to stop that for now and take the question when they're ready.
Thank you very much, Marlene. I'll now ask Mike von Massau to make some opening remarks.
Well, thanks, Dave, and thanks for the opportunity. I'd like to echo a couple of things that Carolyn said. As a small player in the development of dairy at Guelph, it's exciting for me that we've reached this milestone and are a center and really I'm not sure it'll change a whole lot in day to day in the contribution of the University of Guelph to the dairy industry, but it formalizes it and maybe continues to catalyze some of the opportunities across disciplines where we have the opportunity to look at economic impacts and health impacts and nutrition impacts, really integrating all three of those together. So this announcement you've made today, to me, is a profoundly exciting one. I'm excited. I'm pleased to be here today, and I had a short presentation. I'm hoping people saw it. I won't take a whole lot of time, and I'll echo a little bit what Carolyn said. Is that as we look back at the last 6 months and maybe even look forward at the next 6 months with some of the disruptions we've seen in the marketplace, I think we can, as a dairy industry specifically and as a food system generally, take some real pride in how well the system responded to the significant shocks that we got. And I had confidence going in that we would be fine, and even I found it remarkable at how smoothly we came through. And I think that's also reflected in how Canadians, and I expect more broadly in the developed world, feel about the food system. We are, recent study from the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity has also found that Canadians' confidence in the ability of the food system to deliver the products, the dairy products and other products that that we depend on for nutrition and often joy, the pleasure we get from some of these products is at an all-time high, and that's amazing. I think we will continue to see some disruptions, probably fewer as we get to a second wave, because we've gotten better at anticipating what's going to come. The winter will see in most of the developed world a continuation of a significant reduction in opportunities in food service. So those different channels will continue to be, in fact, if anything, I would think food service for a while will decrease again relative to some of the increases we've seen over the last couple of months. But just to wrap up, I think if we take a step back away from COVID, we'll continue to see a lot of the opportunities for the dairy sector that existed before we looked at 6 months ago. People are looking for functional options, and there are opportunities to provide dairy products that provide specific health and nutritional needs for people. People are looking for diversity, and the rate of innovation in dairy products continues to be amazing. And that product development, not only are we improving at the production and health level, but at that processing level, bringing new products to the market. That's going to really continue to be an opportunity for growth, as Carolyn said. The last point I'll make is I think that there's strong evidence that people feel good about, to focus internally for a second, feel good about Canadian dairy production. And I think that says something about how well the industry has done and delivered and will continue to do. So we're in a great place, and things, despite some challenges in the short term, things are looking positive for the dairy industry going forward.
Thanks very much, Mike. Appreciate those comments. So I will remind our audience that there is a chat box in here, and I'm really hoping that I'm going to see a avalanche of questions coming to our panelists through the chat box. I'm not seeing anything there yet. So perhaps while people are busy at their keyboards posting some questions, I will now try again, just briefly. We've got a short video that sort of formalizes or sort of is a brief overview at Guelph and the formal launch of our center. So I will try this again and see whether it will play for me this time. Thank you. Okay. So, well, I won't replay that at this particular point in time, because I want to move on with our Q&A session. But perhaps at the end, now that I figured out how to actually make the audio work, we might give it one more shot. But so, good news, bad news. I'm seeing that the chat box does work, because certainly people were quick to provide some guidance that you couldn't hear me. I'm still not seeing a lot of questions, but we do have a few here, and perhaps we'll get going with our Q&A. Giselle Lapointe actually sent a couple of questions to me ahead of time after viewing the videos, and the first one is for Carolyn. And just to preface it a little bit, with the international trade deals and so on that Canada is involved in, I think we're certainly open to more dairy imports, but I think what we sometimes don't think as much about is the reciprocal export opportunities that does create for Canada. And even though, Carolyn, as you said, the sort of the international trade in dairy products is a small part of the overall production, I think it's nonetheless important, as you pointed out. Giselle has a couple of questions, and the first one is, with one of the things we've seen in COVID is far more online shopping and so on. And I guess her question is, do you think that more online shopping may have an impact on dairy exports and imports, both maybe regionally and internationally as well.
Is that, do you want me to go first on that one, Dave? Or is that for Carolyn?
Sure, it was actually for Carolyn, but Mike,
No, then
either
I'm
panelist is
happy.
great. Thank you.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Oh, sure. I think that, as you mentioned, Mike, in your presentation, that trend of online shopping seems to be one of the trends that will stick around, meaning that there were profound transformation in consumer behavior, and online shopping seems to be one of those in some countries. Because again, we need to be clear, and we have this tendency when we talk to look at our developed country, but not have a global overview. And the reality is that online buying, such as plant-based beverage, animal activists, those are kind of developed country issues. In the real other part of the world, reality are different. So I think online shopping is definitely a trend that will be there to stay. But what will be the impact on the dairy sector per se, that remains to be seen. And that will be interesting because we saw during the pandemic very innovative practices, both at farmers level, but at processor level, opening cheese shop online, or there's all kind of evolvement in terms of practice, even from the industry, that might actually address that. But I think that at the core of what consumers need in their dairy and then a fresh product, there will, that's my personal opinion, will continue to stay, even if they can get it online or not online. There's basic product that people need in their basket, and particularly when they do more cooking and baking at home. And that's another trend that actually most likely will be here to stay, because actually people have learned and developed habit in family. And most likely when I'm working from home will continue for a while. And actually people consume differently. So dairy products will be still at the forefront of what the people need in their food basket, whatever their shopping is, physical or online.
Thank you, Carolyn. Mike, do you want to respond?
I don't think I have a whole lot to add over what Carolyn said. I think it's important to remember that while we're seeing growth in the online shopping experience, it still remains a relatively small portion of overall grocery purchases. So while I think it's important to keep an eye on it, and I think it will continue to grow, people still overwhelmingly, more than 90% of grocery purchases are still in the store. The other thing I think is important to note is that two things. The first is that when we shop online, we tend to be even more habitual than when we are in the store. We have far fewer impulse buys. So you'll see a decrease in things like chips, perhaps, and pop. Although I was speaking to somebody about online grocery, and they say everyone's still managing to find the ice cream over the summer. So I think that one of the things that happens is that people spend less time looking at other products and buy the products that they are familiar with. Those platforms make it very easy to choose the thing that you'd bought before. So new purchases are reduced. The other thing, and I mentioned this in my presentation, is that it really provides for shoppers who are shopping online. It is easy to switch to another offering. We don't necessarily aren't willing to go from store to store to store to find what we want, but it's easy to switch to another website. And as more people are working from home more, it's also easier to be home when a perishable or refrigerated product shows up at your door. So I think that there's a real opportunity, as Carolyn said, for some of those smaller processors to develop a connection directly to the consumer and find a way to get those products directly to the consumer and bypass the large retailers. So I think both of those things will be important for dairy.
Great. Thank you very much to both of you. We've got a question here from Stephen LeBlanc to both of you. And that is to please share your thoughts on how big a role sustainability considerations, both environmental and animal welfare, will play in dairy trade globally and within Canada as we move forward. I don't know who wants to go first.
I don't mind going first. I think that it's been quite a while now that everybody understands in the sector that taking care of the planet and the animals are no longer nice to have. It's a must. It's a request from both government and consumer, and it has been already integrated in most of the practices that we have in the dairy sector. And if you want an example of that, you can actually read our Dairy Sustainability Outlook or Animal Health Report, where we actually showcase programs that we have in different countries around the world that actually have been put into place, both from the industry or imposed by government. But there's tons of programs around the world that are addressing those questions. So I think for trade and for whatever it is for internal consumption or to be traded, that aspect of being respectful or developed or produced in a friendly manner to the environment and the animals, I think it's part of the reality now.
And I'll jump in there, Dave, if I'm allowed. And just that I agree entirely with Carolyn. The only point I would add is that we have to remember that the average consumer has almost no idea how food is produced, and that, I mean, they get roughly that milk comes from cows, but they have no idea what the practices are at the farm level. And so you know, we hear often that we have to re-earn trust. And I would argue that we have a high degree of trust already amongst consumers, but a high degree of trust with a low degree of understanding. And I think what will come is we will see as consumers become more aware of how food is produced, they'll have some things that they like and some things that they don't like. And I think that the industry needs to be at the forefront of doing things from an environmental, from an animal welfare, and even from a health of the individuals working on the farm perspective. I think those things will become increasingly important, and it's not that they aren't now, it's just that people don't have a good sense of what's happening on the farm as it is.
If I may, David, maybe compliment on that. And I think that it's even more important, as you just mentioned, Mike, on the fact that the absence of knowledge or understanding of the factual reality give an empty space to fake news, to opinions, to Gwyneth Paltrow becoming a nutritional expert. It just actually gave an opportunity for those who have personal opinion to promote ideas that are not fact-based. And that, unfortunately, has influence on consumer. So it is more and more important, and we see it both from our dairy companies and the marketing aspect in trying to put the farmers there to show how things are done, to be transparent, and to show that the farmer care about the animals. You know, that information that actually farmers are actually badly treating animals, that is just that's not the reality. And it's more and more important for our sector to put the lights on the reality and the facts, because there's other people out there that actually don't really care about that. And that's the biggest challenge for our sector, because there's a lot of people out there that actually would like to tell people that the solution to solve the problem of the world is to actually stop eating dairy, and it's just not true. And we need to make sure that we're there to balance that actually discuss and that debate around the world.
And the only thing I would add is that we also have to be willing to listen. It is a conversation. It isn't a monologue, and we have to listen to people's concerns and then answer them to say this is what we're doing, or say, well, you have a good point. This is how we're addressing those things. So to me, it's critically important that that's a two-way conversation, because we see what happens in other areas, politics, where we get into these echo chambers and we're not getting traction. If it is a real and meaningful conversation, I think the dairy industry has a profoundly strong story to tell, and as long as we're willing to listen, I think we can be in great shape.
Yeah, and actually on that point, Mike, we actually have a great example in the dairy sector when you talk about listening, and that actually the relationship with the treatment of calf. It has been a point that has been raised over and over again. And actually at IDF, we started to do more work on that topic. We've organized webinars during the summer with ICAR as well on it. We have actually specific work item related to really the treatment of calf from birth to I don't know what's the word for the rest of it. But actually that's definitely something that we've been hearing. It was a concern and that we're addressing from our standpoint in the sector and how we can address that. So I totally agree with you that we need to be connected. I think being disconnected will not serve us well. But the reality is that actually, as I said, not all information are science-based out there, and that's the biggest challenge.
Yep, exactly.
Thank you to both of you. And thank you to our audience. We've got some questions rolling in now. So here's an interesting one. And that is, if we look at resilience during COVID, question, and Mike, I think this is probably addressed to you, was there a noticeable difference between supply managed sectors versus non-supply managed sectors in terms of their ability to respond and then rebound in terms of production systems, food chains, and so on?
That's a great question, and I think it's important for us to look at that question from a couple of different perspectives. The first perspective I would say is that some of the impacts we saw as a result of COVID were industry specific, but not necessarily specific to how we produce. So, you know, we saw some beef plants close in Canada. We were fortunate we didn't see that too much in dairy. That may be a little bit because dairy was lucky, and it may also be that those dairy processing plants don't have as many people close together. And so in that circumstance, beef producers, most notably, and to a lesser degree, pork producers, were hurt by some of those closures. Consumers weren't necessarily. And so we've also seen some industry differences based on sort of pricing structures that were around before COVID. And so some industries are having more challenges, probably not as much COVID related. The one thing that I think is really notable here relative to supply management was our ability to rebound right at the point of lockdown, when we were seeing dumping of milk, both in Canada and in the US. And we recovered from that much more quickly in Canada than we did in the US for a couple of reasons, and I think that are associated with the coordinated selling that we see with supply management, where we have existing relationships at the marketing level with all of the processors, so it was easier to move that milk around. The other thing that happened was that the pain of that loss was shared with all producers. If, as an alternative, you are a dairy producer in Wisconsin and you ship to a co-op or a cheese plant down the road, if the cheese demand tanks significantly, you have to find another market for your milk yourself. And that degree of concentration that they had in Wisconsin made that much more difficult. So the recovery was they recovered, but it was a little bit slower. So I would say in that circumstance, supply management was a real advantage for us in the dairy industry. But I think overall, the entire system has been resilient, and some of the processing pain we felt in some of the meat processing plants had less to do with how we produce beef and pork and more to do with the vulnerability of the people densely together in some of those beef packing plants.
If I may, David, just want to say first that at REF, we've done during the summer a survey on the learnings of the first month of the pandemic within our members. So we gather a lot of data, and we've gathered countries, I think from 23 countries, so 55% of the milk. So that gave us actually a good understanding of what was going on around the world. And I would say that one element that we've saw was the biggest impact on the production was really linked to seasonality. So depending where you were on the planet and where your cycle of production was, that's where the impact came. So for those who were in high production season, then obviously they had to reduce the production or find a way to get either to process the milk and put it into inventory. But in some other country where they were still in the low season, the production was not affected. So I would say that seasonality was probably the most important than the system that you use that had an impact on it. I would say as well, as Mike just said, that the relationship with the processor as well was important. Depending on whenever the system you have, the relationship, the contract that you have with your processor, what actually did make a difference as well. And the third element I wanted to mention is that we have the privilege in the dairy sector around the world to have a lot of co-ops, dairy co-ops. And it's not the same than supply management, and I know very well supply management, but I think the co-op system has been useful in many countries because it did ensure that relationship in terms of processing and flexibility. But also, if we take the example in India, for example, Amul Cooperative, where they have 3.2 million dairy farmers, they were actually able to increase their revenue to return to farmers during the pandemic. So actually the model itself has also been useful into impacting or seeing, but the biggest shift for the processor were really to adapt to the change between food system and retail. And the reality is that they just needed to package differently. They just needed, and that was the biggest challenge because they had the product, they could make it, but they needed to make sure that instead of having a bulk that was going to a restaurant, they were able to package it in a way that was needed at the retail level. So that took a lot of agility, and we've seen as well a lot of collaboration between processors. And that's in a time like that when we can notice that the dairy sector is quite unique in terms of collaboration and how people came together to make it happen.
Thank you to both of you. We have a question here from Mike Loheis, and I'll just read it here. Mike says, we seem to have a conundrum. The most efficient and sustainable dairy production is coming from large, efficient dairy enterprises in developed countries. However, the consumer has distinctly rejected large dairies and prefers small family dairy farms that they perceive are better for the environment and animal welfare. How should we continue to drive progress in sustainable metrics while giving consumers what they want? Who wants to start with that one?
May I disagree with the premise of the question? Because to be honest, I really disagree. It is not true that the most efficient and sustainable dairy production is coming from large and efficient dairy enterprise. I really disagree with that principle. And I've been fighting on that on every international forum, that sustainable farming is not about the size, it's about the farming practices. It's about respecting best practices, and that has nothing to do with the size. So it's not because you're big or you're small that, that your efficiency are different. Obviously your revenue are different and it might have an impact on investment. That's something different. But I think that if we look at the average farm around the world, that myth, and I'm using the word myth, where you hear people saying, we're all against that big industrial farming and that, those are not even like 2% of farms around the world. Like the majority of dairy farms around the world are small operations, and small is relative. So in India, it's 2 cows. In Canada, the average farm was 79 cows while I was around. And in Europe, it could be 100. In US, it's 250 cows. So, the small can be defined differently. But the reality that those big industrial farms are better or are more a bad impact on the environment, again, I've seen farm, and I've been to the US, I've been to that production of 10,000 cows. And to be honest, if you could look at their production, their biodigester were actually using energy for the whole community. And so it's not about the size, it's about the farm practices.
And I'm going to jump in, and Mike, sorry to pick on you, I'm going to disagree with something else you said. And I think there's almost no evidence that consumers have rejected anything about dairy. As Carolyn said, we're still seeing growth. We're seeing changes maybe in the relative proportion of some of the products, and we're seeing some emergence of plant-based alternatives. But overall, I think people feel really good about the dairy industry. And where we run into trouble is when we get some of these videos that reflect a bad practice, regardless, as Carolyn said, of the size. And it gets back to the point I made earlier, which is people have no idea what a dairy farm should look like. So, we have these modern, open, profoundly well-established dairy farms that are good from an environmental sustainability perspective, are great from an animal welfare perspective, and in some cases, depending on the practices, Carolyn, better than some of the small ones. And it depends on what you're doing on the farm. What it gets to the point is, I think, that we need to engage consumers and say, this is what a dairy farm looks like. This is what a family farm looks like. We have this perspective of these large corporate farms, but the truth is, even 250 or 400 cow dairies are usually family operations. They may be incorporated for a variety of reasons, but they are still family-owned businesses. So is there the potential for that to happen, Mike? Perhaps. And it really behooves us to get back to maybe getting away from that sort of idyllic vision from James Herriot days of what a dairy farm looks like, and to talk about the good things that are happening on dairy farms that are run by families in most of the developed and in the developing world. So I don't think it has been rejected. I think that there is concern when people see things that maybe isn't representative, but there's a real opportunity to engage with that consumer and continue to grow the industry. But while Carolyn disagreed with you about size, I'll disagree with you about consumers having rejected anything, because they're clearly still flocking to the dairy case.
Great discussion, and thank you, Mike Loheis, for that question. It certainly hit it was brought out some passion in this discussion, which is fantastic. That's why we're here. Maybe we'll switch focus a little bit, and this question is from Christine Bays, and Christine asks, what are the global views on labeling? And so she's referring to almond, oat, coconut products that in some places are labeled milk. Is there any chance of legislation and both from a Canadian perspective, but what's also happening on the global front? So I'll ask each of our panelists, maybe Mike, to concentrate on the sort of the Canadian perspective, but Carolyn to share sort of on a global perspective, because I know it is on the radar for IDF.
Definitely, and actually, indeed, this is a timely question because we've just released last week a guide on the use of the global dairy terms. As you know, there's a codex standard on the use of dairy terms that actually has been developed in collaboration with IDF years ago. And actually Canada is lucky because those definition from Codex has been implemented in Canadian legislation. So in Canada, you can't prevent that label. All you need to do, and we were doing that at Dairy Farmers of Canada on a regular basis, go to the grocery store, take a picture, and actually just complain to the CID, you know, to the agency. What's the name of the agency? Sorry, I forgot the name. CFIA.
CFIA.
And complain to CFIA because actually they cannot use the term the term milk or dairy because it's protected on their Codex regulation. So if you want to actually have more information, go on our website. As I said, we've published the bulletin last week, and we also have a position paper on it that you could use easily. But I can tell you that contrary to the lucky people in Canada, in other countries, US is a good example. Australia is another one where they haven't implemented the Codex standard in national regulation. So you see that situation. And for an exactly same product that is sold in Canada and in the US, they will be named differently. And that's very interesting. Same packaging, same product. You look at that just side by side, and the US one will be using the word milk and they will not be using it in Canada. So we do have the tools in place, but it needs some reminder, both to the government, but also to the companies that are using those terms. Because as I said, Codex standard is super clear. Milk is coming from an animal. It's just the definitions and it cannot be clearer than that. So we're not saying that those products have not some interest, but we're just saying that they're not milk and dairy and cannot be labeled that way. And for those who are a member of IDF, we've also launched last summer a plant-based beverage communication framework. We've actually looked at it from all different angles, the difference in terms of nutrition, economic impact, environmental aspect, safety, regulation. We've looked at all aspects of it. We've built key messages, and then there's actually a program where each country can go look at what are their concerns with stakeholders and actually have a plan on how to address it. So that's an issue that we've been working on at IDF, and we're actually currently working on phase 2 of that project, which is regarding plant-based product. And we still haven't found the name yet. Sometimes we say food products, sometimes we say imitators, and we talk about the fake cream, fake butter, fake cheese. So those are the products that now we're looking at and see how that can be addressed.
So I think Carolyn did a pretty good job of talking about the Canadian context. So I'm going to just take a step back, Christine, if I could, and say the evidence in the consumer research is that people aren't that confused. So it's probably something that we can continue to monitor and take action on. But I'm not sure that it's frankly a significant fight worth fighting. That people who are buying almond beverage or oat beverage, whether it's called milk or not, isn't confusing people. The research is relatively clear that I've seen that people are making that choice proactively. They're not saying, "Oh, this is just as good as milk." They're making a choice, and so while I understand the sensitivity, and while I understand and think that there's value in the clarity, I'm not sure that that's a reason that market share is growing. And it's the same discussion that I have with beef and pork producers with the word meat. So is it good to be clear? Is it good to highlight the differences? Yes, but is the fact that the term milk is being used causing people to be confused and they'd prefer dairy milk and then go to one of these others? I'm not convinced it's that big a problem.
Okay, may I disagree, David?
I expected you would.
It's just because we do have different data, so it might depend on different country. Actually, we do have marketing data in several countries, partly related to millennials, and a lot of those people believe that actually the plant beverage has the same nutritional value than dairy. And it has been causing problem, particularly in children nutrition, which actually cause the deficiency in child nutrition. And actually you've seen recently, I think it's less than a year ago in the US, that actually the government issued a notice just to remind people, because it was actually a health problem for children, because you had some parents that were actually feeding their newborns and baby with soy beverage instead of milk and thinking it was the same thing. So I believe there is still some confusion. And I would say that the reason why the people that made those products are actually using the dairy term and are putting their product in dairy case, in making sure that they've seen, is because they want to benefit from the aura of nutrition and naturality of our product. They're really trying to bang on a wagon. And that's what we're fighting against. Make sure that people understand they're not the same thing. I agree with you. They can decide to eat them if they want to, but do not believe it's the same level of protein and it's the same benefit that the dairy is providing in terms of nutrition.
Yep, I agree with you on that. I'm just not sure that the term milk is the primary reason for that. I think people rationalize that I want to switch and that it'll be just as good, and I believe that that's real and that's an important place to. But I don't think that we solve that problem just by not allowing them to use the term milk, because I expect that problem is just as big in Canada, where it is more difficult to use. So at the very least, it's not the only reason that confusion exists.
That's correct. But we need to start somewhere, and the production of dairy term is an important aspect of it.
Yep.
Thank you to both of you for that discussion. Warren Skippen asked a question here earlier, and I want to circle back to that. And I think both of you addressed it partially in your pre-recorded presentations, but perhaps we can continue the discussion here a little bit. Do you think the COVID-19 pandemic will have a lasting effect on consumer protein preferences? So, and Mike particularly talked about that in his pre-recorded session about more home cooking, comfort foods, and so on. And I think we've seen some short-term changes in preferences, but how much of that is long-lasting, and how might that bode for the dairy industry as we move forward?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish between place. So we're eating at home more because we have to eat at home more. And so to a degree, some of the product shifts we've seen have less to do with a change in preference than it does with a change in place. So I think that if and when we start going out to restaurants more, and I think the restaurant industry will look different regardless once we come out, that demand will come back. I think Carolyn talked a little bit about, people baking more and doing more home cooking and using more sort of raw ingredients. My expectation is, as we get back to whatever the new normal looks like, that will decrease a little bit, but we'll get back to a level that's higher than it was before. So demand for butter for baking and that sort of thing will continue to be higher in the home environment than it was before. I think the question also talked about sort of alternate proteins. And to a significant degree, I would argue that some of the plant-based, maybe less for plant-based beverages than for some of the plant-based proteins, that demand has been led to a significant degree by food service. So as we get back and cook at home, we tend to cook the things that we're familiar with. My expectation is that demand for things like Beyond Beef and those products has gone down because we're eating at restaurants less than we were before. But that the trend to change in demand for increased variety in protein, because the biggest driver of this change is not people going vegan or vegetarian. It is people who are eating a more diverse portfolio of proteins. I think that will come back and will continue, but it has undoubtedly slowed during the COVID-19 pandemic because we go with what we're familiar with and because our habits have been that way at home anyway.
Maybe two things I'd like to add. The first one is something that you addressed, Mike, in your presentation, and was related to affordability. And I think that's an important element because when we do look at plant-based compared to dairy, if you look at it at the quality of the protein, and it's been proven many, many times that actually the dairy protein is the best value you can get for your buck. And you've seen that during the pandemic. People see that they can get access to a natural product which is nutrient dense at an affordable price. So I think that's the first element I wanted to add. And the second one, and that's something that I always used to say, and I like that, is that we tend to forget sometimes the miracle of dairy. You know, you have a cow that is eating grass and non-edible grain and food detritus that nobody can eat, and transform that into a nutrient-dense, natural product that people can actually eat and drink everywhere around the world. And that's a reality. So yes, you've got the plant-based alternative, and yes, you have different type of protein alternative, and yes, you do have the lab and the fermented product, and you have all of those things that are popping here and there. But we shouldn't forget that, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, milk and dairy is more than just providing good value for your dollar, good quality protein, like 14 nutrients that is in addition to that, but also providing livelihood and rural economy development around the world. And I'm not just talking about developing countries. Even in Canada, without a dairy sector, the scenery around the country would be completely different, as well as all the economic rural situation around the country. So dairy is also that, is also the socioeconomic impact. And also, and that's something we talk less and not enough, and we need to address more, is the ecosystem service of dairy. And actually, that's a new work item that we have at IDF, because we need to communicate more about that. Because people actually complain about the negative effect of dairy production on the land and the water. And there's some element that needs to be addressed, and we've been working on reducing the greenhouse gas emission and all of that. But there's also benefit that the presence of livestock are actually contributing to the biodiversity, to the bioeconomy, to production of energy. And we've got programs around the world of utilization of manure in different ways that are providing energy in different countries around the world, whatever they are developed or developing. So dairy is more than just one element. And I think that's why I believe in the future of dairy. Whenever the different choices that will be available, there will always be more to the dairy story than what we can see in all of those different type of alternative protein.
Thank you to both. Maybe I'll follow up with a question that was submitted earlier, and that sort of follows on in this theme a little bit. And Giselle Lapointe asked, with the some of the local milling, brewing, ghost kitchens, food preparation, both in the home but also locally during this time, are there concerns about food safety going forward with some of these changing trends? So again, more local production, more sort of a movement to sort of smaller meal preparation, not only home, but some of the local delivery and those types of things.
Both of was keen to jump in. Yeah,
I will give it to you, Mike.
yeah. I'm not a food safety expert, but I will say that the infrastructure is pretty good to ensure food safety in this country, and as far as delivery is concerned, the people who are getting home delivery of perishable products like dairy products are largely doing it either in a pickup so that they can control it, or are doing it because they're working at home more, and that coordinating that delivery becomes much easier. So I don't think that smaller on-farm processors, or the fact that we're delivering food, whether it's from a restaurant or from a retailer, is significantly increasing the risk of food safety issues at all, or we wouldn't be doing it. I think that the companies doing this delivery have too much at stake to take unnecessary risks, and there are probably products that are higher risk by a long shot than dairy is. So to me, that's not a concern. Is there potential for people who haven't cooked at home much before to make mistakes at home? I'm sure there are, but those aren't related to dairy specifically. Those are related to the fact that we're doing more at home, and maybe with less experience. But I think if we look at the last 6 months, there's very little evidence that we've had any sort of food safety issues with people cooking more at home.
Yeah, and yeah, I completely agree, Mike. And the reality is that not just with cooking at home, but we had no breach of food security, food safety around the world. When we've surveyed a member, we have very strict practice in place in the dairy sector. And I think one element that is interesting in the pandemic, if you compare to our colleagues in meat, for example, the dairy plant has been much less affected by disease of employees. And the disruption of production, both on farms or the processing level, is very limited in the dairy sector. So we have a long history of practice of food safety and regulation in place, and education about as well. I think the importance of the cold chain in the dairy sector, partially because Canada is a fresh dairy country. And again, contrary to other countries where actually the UHT milk, for example, is more the norm, or powder. That's very different in US and Canada. It's fresh milk, and so people are kind of used to manipulate fresh product, contrary to other countries maybe.
Thank you both. We've got a couple of questions here, maybe just to wrap things up. But so Carrie Lismore makes the comment, one of the challenges to improving the understanding of the consumer about modern dairy farms is that a lot of the pictures used in marketing of dairy products show the red bank barn and cows grazing on pasture. That may not be the reality in all of our production systems. This becomes the image consumers expect, and many respond negatively when they're shown a real dairy farm or some of the realities. And so I guess your comments about how we as a dairy industry portray ourselves both domestically and internationally.
Sorry, Caroline, I'm going to jump in because this is one that I think that we haven't necessarily done a very good job as an industry. The first thing is, it's not just the images we use as an industry it's the images people have always seen of dairy. And so again, it becomes important to show these modern barns and how great they are and what a good job they do. And if they don't see them, then maybe their initial reaction to those images are negative. I would also argue, Carrie, that one of the challenges we have is not just sort of that showing that idyllic pastoral image of the red bank barn. I think I cringe when I see some of the dairy yogurt ads and stuff. We have dancing.
Oh, looks like we're having maybe a bit of a challenge for Mike.
Yeah. Do you want me to jump in, David?
Yeah, maybe Carolyn. Mike, where you seem to be dropping you. So maybe I'll see if Carolyn wants to pick up here, and then we'll circle back to Mike.
Yeah, and maybe if you allow me, I would not comment on the Canadian situation because I don't think it would be appropriate here. But just to say that in reality, that image and that grazing aspect has become a competitive aspect that has been used in branding in some country around the world. So it's more than just a question of image. We're leaving the non-competitive phase to go into the competitive aspect. It's becoming into another aspect. But I think to circumvent that is that we need to go back to what I was saying earlier, and it's focusing on farming practices. Because again, it's not because cows are in a barn or cows are grazing outside that they're not done in a sustainable manner. I think it's a question of insisting on the practices. And it was very interesting. I'll share with you when I visited a farm in Australia. And it was funny because when you arrive, and I was like, I was looking at the barn, you know, it's just how we're used to in Canada. You know, you go to a dairy farm and then there was no barn. There were like 800 cows out there. And there was like a milking parlor outdoor. And it was just, that was the farm. And then when I had the meeting with the government and they started talking about activists complaining about how the milk was produced, and I was like, what? You know, they've got it the best way possible. But now they were complaining about the heat for the cows. They were complaining about the fact that the cow had to walk too long to get to the parlor. So there's always something. And just what I'm trying to say here is that, you know, every system, every geographical reality has a situation that needs to be addressed. But at the end of the day, what's important is that we focus on the core of the farmers, which is willingness to take care of the land, to have a safe product, and take care and take care of the animals. So there's, I think, a story that we need to build around that as well.
Thank you, Carolyn. Mike, I think we'll try to circle back to you because we lost you partway through there, and maybe if you want to finish your thoughts there.
Well, I'm not sure where am I back? Are we good?
You're back. Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm not sure where we lost you, but I think where I disconnected. But I think it gets back to my point about awareness, about portraying the industry in a way that's realistic and telling the story why we're producing the way we are now. And it's not just sort of the idyllic pastoral red barn and cows out on pasture. I would say that, you know, sometimes we've done advertising that has dancing cows up on their back legs, doing things that you know are unrealistic images, and we think we see them and we know that they're unrealistic and images, but I'm not sure every consumer knows that too. So I think we need to be careful in the images we portray in advertising, but we also need to have that broader discussion about how we're producing, why we're producing that way, and why it's the right way to be doing things.
Great, thank you very much. So let's see, I'm just sort of scrolling back through some questions. There's one here specifically for Carolyn from Christine Bays. And Christine makes the observation, seems that IDF has less of a focus on the animal, perhaps, and more on milk. And just to clarify sort of what IDF's focus is and sort of where that falls in terms of the animal versus the product, I guess, or both.
And yeah, and I would probably, again, I think our website probably does not represent the balance and the scope of the work, but I'll just answer actually to Christine privately. And the reality is that we do have two committees that are focusing on farming. So we have one standing committee on dairy farming, and we have one standard committee on animal health and welfare. And David, you're very familiar with that committee, so you can be a witness of the dynamism of that committee. So there's a lot of work that actually has been done on all aspects of the animal health and welfare. But actually, I would say that we do a lot of work on mastitis and on work that are related to disease. So we do a survey every year, and we have the symposium on the mastitis that where we present the new science on this disease. So there's a lot of work that is done on that level. We also collaborate very actively with the OIE, which is the Animal Health Organization. And so we are a very active stakeholder, and we have published in 2019 a joint publication with the FAO, OIE, and IDF on a guide for the best practices on animal welfare. So again, there's a lot of work that has been done, and I really encourage you to go and take the on a website we do as well as animal health report that we publish every year, and in that you will find tons of examples of work that has been done, the latest science, the program related to animal health and welfare. And that's something that we take very seriously, and we're very active. But obviously, we have 9 working areas, and the fact that IDF is at the origin organization focused on standard. So we do have a lot of work that is done on methodology, on samplings, on testing, on standards. So that actually, if you look at it in terms of content, it does take a lot of input. But we also have a lot of place for the farmers. We have a farmer's seat on our board. We have a farmer's seat on the science and program committee. And so, and we do organize a farmers roundtable as well. So no, we take care of the farm aspect very carefully.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just add to Carolyn's comments, because as Carolyn mentioned, I actually have recently been asked to chair the Standing Committee on Animal Health and Welfare, and I think one of the things that happens is, as Carolyn pointed out, IDF really is the only international body that really speaks primarily to milk and milk products, and there are a lot of regulatory and policy type activities on that front. On the animal health and welfare and farm management, there are a lot of other organizations, both internationally, that work in that space. So a lot of our work there is collaborative. We try not to duplicate or do to duplicate work that's being done elsewhere. We look to do that collaboratively, as Carolyn pointed out, with some of the documents around welfare standards, and we work with ICAR on in terms of definitions and sensors and those types of things. So it is maybe a little bit different from that perspective, but I like to think that we're quite active in that space as well. Thank you. So I'm just scrolling through the questions that folks have posted, and I think we've addressed pretty much everything there. So we're at almost an hour and a half, so I think that's we've certainly had a really nice discussion this morning. I really want to thank both Carolyn and Mike for the time that they've taken, both in preparation of their pre-recorded presentations, but also the time they've spent with us this morning. This has been a really engaging session. I thank the audience for the questions that they've posted. I think that's generated some really nice discussion. I don't know about all the rest of you, but I've really enjoyed this, and I'm really grateful for everyone for the time that they've put into this. One of the things I did not mention at the outset is that we are recording this session because we were contacted by a number of people who indicated they would have loved to attend but had other commitments, and so we said we would make the recording available to them. Again, similar format as what we did with the pre-recorded sessions. Maybe just before we wrap up, a couple of things, and I'll invite Carolyn and Mike if they have any closing comments that they'd like to make before we sign off. I'll start with Carolyn, perhaps.
I think I will just remind all the attendants of my call for action, which is actually to be interested by the work that is done at the international level, at the global level, and the benefits that you could have in your work in collaborating with colleagues from around the world, and encourage you to visit our colleague from Phil IDF Canada if you want to, and if you want to work with us. That will actually be my action call.
Thank you, Carolyn. Mike, any closing comments?
Well, I think I enjoyed the discussion. Carolyn, thank you, and Dave, thanks for the opportunity. I think things are positive for the dairy industry, and it's exciting. It's an exciting area to be working in, and I look forward to opportunities to collaborate with all sorts of people. So, thanks for the opportunity and engaging discussion.
So again, thank you both. And just before we sign off, a couple of things. Again, I'd like to thank our organizing committee, our steering committee, our Dairy at Guelph sort of working group behind the scenes, and particularly Dan Lacroix for pulling this together. And I've been asked to try one more time, and I will unplug my headset this time, to show this video that Kevin Hogg, who's in our IT department here at the University of Guelph, was very kind to pull this together sort of last minute for us, and I want to try to do it justice. So I'm going to try one last time to show this video, and so this time hopefully you will hear hopefully you're able to hear it. So again, thank you very much. We will sign off at this point. I will remind our audience that tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, we will have the second part of our virtual showcase event. And we've got 5 panelists on queue for tomorrow who have shared through their pre-posted presentations a bit of a snapshot of some of the work that they're engaged in, and that Dairy at Guelph is engaged in various aspects of the dairy research landscape. I certainly invite you to view those videos ahead of time and then join us tomorrow morning armed with great questions like we had this morning for our panelists, and hopefully we'll have a really nice discussion tomorrow morning as well. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.